Okay, continuing with the Civil Liberties Unit, we are going to touch on free press and freedom of religion today. I'm not with free press. To me, I just think free press should always be free press, with very, very few exceptions. National security issues, maybe. I know there's a lot of topics that we can debate. Normally in class we'll debate some of these things where. What about if, terrorist type attack things or ways to, kill American soldiers in a guerrilla warfare, like if you could publish stuff like that. But generally, free press is free press, and that's just the way it is. So these aren't as exciting to me, most topics with free press. But anyway, New York versus Minnesota. Just to run through some of the big ones over the years. New York versus Minnesota, they said no prior restraint, the court did, which basically means you can't generally prevent anybody from publishing something. You could punish them if it violated some sort of constitutional law, which, again, I don't know how it could, but you can't stop them from publishing it. So New York versus Minnesota established the idea of no prior restraint, and it also incorporated free press so that states and local governments had to give free press. New York Times Company versus United States. This had to do with the Vietnam War. The Pentagon Papers were going to be published. It was a bunch of information that had been attained that was going to basically call out the United States and explain and list all sort of bad things we had done through the beginning of the Vietnam War. And basically, in parts, they show that it was sort of unjust that we sent troops in the first place, that we really didn't, there was something that happened in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And it talked about some of the atrocities and stuff. So this was going to look bad for the U.S., and the U.S. tried to prevent publication, saying it was a national security issue. Well, the court basically said, no, sorry, the Pentagon Papers can be published. It's not a national security issue. It's just basically historical stuff. And so they allowed free press there, too. And really in all of these, that's the case. Reno versus ACLU. This used to be one of the biggies. I haven't really heard much about this, and it's not one of the required cases anymore for AP. But this was interesting because it's when the internet really first started getting going, and there was a law passed called the Communications Decency Act, which was a way to try to protect kids from inappropriate stuff online. And it basically was requiring that sites that had certain images and certain things be limited to 18 years old, but also like password protected, and just ways that the average person would not be able to stumble upon certain things. And the Supreme Court said, no, sorry, free press and free speech. And they said, too bad. If you're trying to protect kids, then the way to protect kids is to have the parents watch the kid, have certain blocking software, or to just don't let them on the internet or whatever. So they allowed free press there too. Now, freedom of religion. Understand, I put here separation of church and state. Some people might not like that because it doesn't actually say that in the Constitution. It says basically that Congress can't pass laws respecting and establishing religion. It's called the Establishment Clause. Courts, generally more liberal courts, have interpreted that to mean separation of church and state. So if you ever hear that, that actually comes from a letter that Jefferson wrote, those words. They're not actually in the Constitution. So where it says Congress can pass no law respecting and establishing religion, that then becomes up for debate. And generally, teachers and professors and more liberal people will say, that clearly means the government should never get involved with religion at all. There should be no prayer in school, and there should be no recognition of maybe religious holidays or whatever. But then there are people who tend to be more on the right who are strict constructionists, and they go, wait a minute, as long as Congress doesn't pass a law establishing religion, then those other things can be okay. And they get into things like, what if a teacher says, okay, class, while you're writing down your assignment for the day, I'm going to say a prayer, and you can join me if you want. Well, that the court has said would be clearly unconstitutional. And I think most teachers, probably all teachers at Green Hope, would agree. But somebody may go, well, wait a minute, yeah, but that was just a teacher doing something, and the students could be busy with something else, and they didn't have to join. And then really Congress didn't really pass a law establishing a religion like it says in the Constitution. So there are people who you have both extremes. You have the generally the more left side that will say the government never at all involved in religion at all. You should not call it Christmas break. You should call it a winter break or winter holiday or whatever. And then you have the far right, socially at least, and they would say, look, as long as the government doesn't pass a law establishing a national religion, they can do everything else. All right, and again, most people probably fall in between. So just understand that it may not be as clear cut as maybe it appears. So, the Engel v. Vital case is one of the required cases. This one basically just says, as it says there, that there cannot be non-denominational daily prayers in public schools. So they tried to make a prayer that would apply to a lot of different religions. And every day you say it, kind of when you say the pledge or whatever. And the court said no. So no non-denominational school prayer. Well, the next year that made the next one, a pretty easy decision. If I recall, I think it was unanimous. Abington School District v. Shempen. And that one, they basically struck down in public schools daily Bible reading. So just reading a passage from the Bible. Again, most of you would probably agree that should be unconstitutional, but it all depends on how you interpret those words, that Congress can't pass a law respecting an establishment of religion. So no daily Bible reading in public schools with Abington. Wallace v. Jaffrey was, it's kind of an interesting one, kind of controversial, because what they did in Alabama is Alabama was trying to get prayer in school, and the court recognized that, but they knew they couldn't do it based on a series of decisions, and so what they did is they passed a law saying we're going to have a daily moment of silence. It was like a minute, 1 or 2, I think it was 1 minute. And it was a daily moment of silence, maybe at the start of second period, just have it every day, 1 minute. And they would read a little thing that would say, here's what your options are. I don't remember exactly, but it was like, you can think about your day ahead, you can reflect on your life kind of thing, you can think about your homework, or if you want, you can say a daily, a silent prayer to yourself. And originally they didn't even have that part in, but they added it to try to sort of encourage people to say a silent prayer. Again, a lot of you may be thinking it's silent. Who cares? It's not, how is that establishing religion? The court may have looked the other way, but they did recognize it was Alabama, and that, if it had been Vermont or Massachusetts, maybe that would have been different, but they knew it was the Bible Belt, and they were trying to get religion in schools, and so they kind of didn't want them to pull one over on them. So they said you can't have that daily moment of silence. Now, you can have a moment of silence to honor 9/11 victims, or if there was some disaster or something, you can do that, but just not a daily one. So no daily moment of silence. Lynch v. Donnelly. This case it's kind of interesting one. It's that the result of this case is the court established what's called the Santa Claus test. Some people maybe on the left may not like this decision, but what had happened is the town of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, took tax dollars and in their town square, I guess, downtown, they put a nativity scene, Christmas, and so it had Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus and wise men and all that, sheep and all that. And it had been tax dollars, so somebody said, wait a minute, that's the government endorsing religion, they can't do that. Well, the court allowed the scene in this case because along with that scene, there were reindeer and snowmen and a sleigh and a plastic Santa Claus and all this stuff. So basically what the court said is, by having Santa Claus and the rest of that stuff there, candy canes and whatever, all these plastic things, that made it go from the religious sort of Christmas to the commercial Christmas. And that made it be more about like trying to spruce up downtown and get people down there to shop or whatever it might be. So it became known as the Santa Claus test, where basically you have a religious scene, but you had to have like the Santa Claus stuff too, and it would be okay. Now, a little bit earlier, Lemon v. Kurtzman, this is still used today as to whether or not the government can do something that involves religion. And what the court, they basically established like a law in this decision. And they established a 3-part test. That if the government does something, it has to meet all these 3 parts. Right? And so the first thing is, if the government does something, then that thing that they do that might be religious has to have a secular purpose. It has to have a non-religious purpose for that thing they did. Right? So number one has to have a non-religious purpose. They then said whatever the government does that could be religious, it can't really help or really hurt a religion. So it should be almost like if they do a religious thing, it shouldn't really help people try to join their religion or somehow limit other religions. It's kind of vague, I know. And then the third part, so basically you got two so far. Must have a secular purpose, can't really help or really hurt a religion. And then the third part was there can be no excessive entanglement between church and state, between religion and government. And again, very difficult to judge that. So that was the three-part Lemon test. So that's dealing with the establishment of religion. The last one, we got a few minutes here. Free exercise of religion. We all agree that Americans can believe whatever they want. Now then it becomes, what about actions? What about when it evolves into actions? And then that's where there's debate. So in West Virginia State Board of Education v. Barnett, in that case, the court overturned a previous decision, and they said, look, if kids in public schools don't want to say the pledge, they don't have to say the pledge. So we see that a lot, in public schools now. Some students might not even stand up. They might not say the pledge, and the court has backed them in that. Reynolds v. U.S., the government had banned, in a territory, had banned polygamy, marrying multiple wives. There at the time, Mormons practiced it, and so Mormons challenged it and said it violates their right to exercise their religion. And the court said, too bad, you can't use religion as an excuse to break a law, which, again, that aspect I think is crazy. Like, that's exactly, the Constitution's higher than laws. So if the law violates the Constitution, then the law should go away. But anyway, the court said, basically, sorry, we're going to allow the ban on polygamy. So that probably did restrict their right to exercise their religion, but since Mormons have changed their doctrine, so it's not officially part of their religion now. Wisconsin v. Yoder is one of the required cases too. This basically allows Amish to pull their kids out of school a little bit earlier than state law had previously said, because Mormons didn't want their kids to be impacted by the technology and the modern aspects of school. So they wanted to pull them out a little bit earlier, and the court said that's their right to exercise their religion. I'm just trying to see how much time I have left here. Okay, still got 2 minutes. So the last one we'll finish with, Church of Lukwami Babalu High. Sorry for you animal rights people. This was a fairly controversial one. What had happened is outside the city of Miami, there were these people who had a lot had moved from who had escaped Cuba, and they brought this religion called the Santiago religion with them. And part of the religion was animal sacrifice. Well, these were poor immigrants, and they did not own homes with fenced yards and all that, so they lived in apartments, and they would just go out on the street and they would sacrifice lots of animals. And people were grossed out, thought it was a health issue, and so the city banned animal sacrifices. Well, the Supreme Court said no. He said they're allowed to have their animal sacrifices as part of their religion. You can't target them with this law banning animal sacrifices. Now, they did allow for the city, and this is what they did, to restrict it to a public area where they could put a fence and tell people to go do it there. They couldn't say just in your private home, because that would mean that then only wealthy people were allowed that right, and that wouldn't be fair. Right? So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but if some people can't afford a home and a fenced yard and all that, so you have to give them a place to do the same, to exercise their same right as somebody else. So this did allow animal sacrifices, and what basically the court has said on some of these cases is they don't like it when any government passes a law that appears to directly target one group of people, which happened in Cantwell v. Connecticut, and one of the earlier ones we mentioned too. So anyway, I will stop there. So we've gone through freedom of speech and freedom of press and freedom of religion now, and we will continue with the Bill of Rights tomorrow. Thank you.